So we began our road trip in Chattanooga, our hometown, where we spoke to some strangers and we talked to them about their experience with the church, both outside of it and inside of it. We learned that there are a lot of people sitting on the outside looking into the church. We've reflected on some of those conversations with each other, with friends, with pastors, and we've talked with Mike Graham about the 15%. It's a staggering number, the 15% of American adults who have left the church. That's 40 million individuals. It's a big number. And one of the things that I think we're hearing that's a common theme as we kind of research this topic and talk to people is that the world says that love is everything. Just love everybody, love. In a sense, we've lost truth in that. And I think one of the reactions of the church has been to talk about truth, but I think we've struggled on the love side. And so I think that's one of the common threads that has come up in a lot of our conversations, which I think brings us to today and who we're talking to and what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when you go on a journey, you're not exactly sure always where it's going to head. And that's certainly the case with today's guest, because we're going to be talking about the brain. And I never thought to think about the brain as one of the key components of how we think about doing church better. What's interesting is the connection is Michael Graham wanted to geek out about the brain and started talking about how he had to do pre-pastoring because people's mental state was just kind of messed up, especially after COVID. And so today on the show, we have Michel Hendricks. Him and Jim Wilder wrote the book, The Other Half of Church. Michael is got his MDiv from Denver Seminary. He has been a teacher and trainer for more than 25 years as the former pastor of spiritual formation at Flatirons Community Church in Lafayette, Colorado, and he is married and has 3 adult children. Welcome to the podcast. And one thing I'll say is I'm excited that you actually are applying your pastoral experience with Jim's knowledge of the brain and kind of making it practical.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me on. I'm excited to be here, and I'm glad we're kind of asking and swimming in the same pool, asking the same questions. And all those questions lead back to tension in a sense. And even as we look at the brain, there's some interesting areas about tension that are important for us to know and actually apply to Christian discipleship.
So, I mean, just to kind of orient the listener, to me, the premise of your book, the reason why it's called The Other Half is that you're basically saying we're only using one half of our brain and that we need to become more full brain Christians. And I think in part of that is there's a misunderstanding of what like left brain and right brain even mean, right? Like that we think it's like a creative side and a logical side, but I think you guys have a different take on that. So talk about those misunderstandings and sort of the bigger context of what you're trying to accomplish by writing this book. Like, why do you want Christians to read it?
You know, a lot of books are written by people who have become experts in a field, and they want to kind of show off what experts they are so other people can learn and be experts like they are. And The Other Half of Church is not that book at all. It was started in confusion and frustration, I would say, and for me, very much a time where I had a lot more questions than answers about how people mature, how character is formed, how do we produce people in our churches that love really well. You know, if you walked around your block where you lived and asked people, I don't think the average person would say, yeah, Christians, I associate them with people who love well. And so that's what I was swimming in when we're looking at this stuff. And I would also, you know, as a pastor of discipleship, I'd go try a bunch of stuff to help the people in our church grow and myself. And the word I kept running into is the word sometimes, which means these typical Christian prescriptions we give to help us mature and grow and heal, et cetera, and thrive as human beings. They work sometimes and for some situations and for some problems, and for other problems the normal prescriptions don't seem to work, or they're not enough. Maybe they're just one piece of a puzzle of, you know, 7 other pieces, but we're missing the 6 of the 7. And so it was in that kind of tension is when I met Jim Wilder and we sat down and I basically shared these frustrations as a discipleship pastor. And Jim said, you know, Michael, I think I might help you to understand, you know, find answers to these questions if you understand a little bit how God designed the human brain to mature us and to grow our character. If you want to understand why we don't see more radical transformation in our churches.
Welcome to A World in Tension podcast, a place where we examine the opposing pulls and struggles of life to uncover clarity, purpose, and practical solutions. Come join us as we seek to get comfortable facing the uncomfortable. This is A World in Tension.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that you weren't satisfied with the fact that it works sometimes. I really appreciate that you wanted to dig deeper and kind of, it's interesting how Jim kind of came into your path. But so talk about that misunderstanding of the left and right brain. What are we missing? What don't we get, especially I think about the right brain?
Our right brain is really our what I like to call our social, emotional, relational brain. And so it's looping. It's like a microprocessor. It's looping many times a second, asking questions like, who am I? Who do I know here? And who's bonded to me and feels like family? And who gets me right now? Does anybody here actually understand me and know what's going on? Or are they all indifferent? Or maybe they're actively hostile. And all this is from nonverbal stuff we're picking up. It's very fast. I'm not thinking. This is not conscious thought. This is happening without me knowing it's happening. Right? And then another set of questions our right brain asks is identity questions like, who am I in this situation? And who are my people? And what do we act like in this kind of a situation? What is it like us as our people to act like here or versus over there? Like when someone cuts me off in traffic, or when I get a promotion at work, or when I get home from school and realize that my son got an F on his math test, or when the neighbor parks his car in front of my driveway and I need to be to work in 20 minutes because I have a really important meeting. And so these are going very, very, very fast. Okay. Also has to do with a lot with emotions. What emotions am I feeling here? Am I feeling fear? Am I feeling anger, shame, disgust, despair? Our left brain's a lot slower, so it takes a while. So I'll be feeling all this stuff that I don't know why I'm feeling, and then all of a sudden I'll start to understand, oh, I bet this is happening because of this, or I'm able to explain it. Our left brain is our verbal brain. It's slower, but it's verbal. It's the problem-solving part of our control processor. It's the part that searches to believe, to know the right things and explain the right things. It's the part that comes up with strategies. And in churches, we've really emphasized, we need to believe the right things. And that is important, but that's definitely a left brain skill. We've all seen the person who believes all the right things. He dots all the I's and crosses all the T's, theologically, just perfect. And then you see the way he treats the people around him, and you're like, wait a second. Isn't that supposed to have an effect? But what we see, that's an example of, the other half of church. We've developed left brain stuff really well, but the right brain's been largely ignored. And, the right brain is, how do we love well? How do we show compassion to people? Colossians 3:12 is the best description of when a right brain is working well. Paul says, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. All 5 of those are very strong right brain skills we develop. And so when you see someone who knows all the theology but just snaps at people, and you realize, okay, he's not developing, or I could say she too. I just see it more in males, but females as well. They need some work. They're missing half of what we would call discipleship.
Have you spent much time thinking about why this happened, like the historical context for why the church has kind of overdeveloped the left side and maybe underdeveloped the right?
Yeah, Jim Wilder wrote a real small book called The Solution of Choice, where he goes into that. And there's a series of developments in society that have done that. A big one was the Enlightenment, which had a lot of really positive things coming from it. But one of the changes that wasn't so positive is we saw the essential characteristic of human beings is our thoughts and thinking, and thinking correctly, right? I think, therefore I am. So we think conscious thinking is really the most human thing, when conscious thinking is an important thing, but there's a whole lot of stuff that's actually pre-conscious, and that's key to human thriving. And so that kind of is what first disconnected and put all of this emphasis on thinking right, which really essentially, without people knowing the neuroscience at that time, started aiming us towards developing left brains and leaving right brains largely off in the weeds.
So if I'm trying to paint a picture for the listener, would you say it's fair to kind of envision this brain with kind of a well-developed left side and kind of an atrophied or shriveled up right side. Is that kind of the picture that you had in your mind as you were writing and thinking about this?
Yeah, kind of an undeveloped. It's not physically shriveled in the sense that it's like a muscle, but it's undeveloped, it's untrained. And the right brain is fully trainable. It just, you don't train it using willpower, direct willpower.
Why is the church so allergic to that? Is it because it like relational and emotional stuff feels more squishy and less like, it's like almost, people in a Christian environment, they want to hold to something tangible. Well, the word of God is very tangible. I mean, you can interpret it differently, but like there's words, I can read it, I can study it, I can, do hermeneutics on it, I can do whatever. It's almost like it works against itself that you need to feel stuff for it to develop, but you're afraid of that. You're even told that your heart is evil and, like, almost a downplay of emotions. Like what's playing in from the church kind of thinking that's not allowing that to develop?
Helping people, become emotionally resilient. How do you handle big emotions and stay loving? That's not something that was in anybody's discipleship training course, right? How do we develop our identity and our group identity so that it forms our character and looks a lot like the family of God? We've done that a little bit in the church, but not really known the centrality that God designed our brains to look for our identities as a driver of our character, and paying attention to our fears, because our fears really often lead to show us where we're not thinking with God. We're thinking separately on our own. And so a lot of times there's a lot of fear too. This is uncomfortable. I don't know. A lot of people have invested in the left brain and they're very skilled left brain. And all of a sudden you come to them and when they, a lot of times they'll read the other half of church and feel like, wow, I really got a 50% education. I thought I got a really good education, but it's like I'm missing this whole area. And all I can say to that is welcome to the club. That's exactly what I felt. It's not like I'm lording it over people and say, I was like, oh my word, I have so much work to, my wife and I did it. We kind of just jumped into the deep end of the pool. When we met Jim and his wife, Kitty, they kind of opened the doors to their house and their hearts and their family to us and started just inviting us to everything they did. And we just jumped in deep into the pool. But I can't tell you how many times my wife and I looked at each other and said, I wish we would have learned this 20 years ago when our kids were still in the home. Right.
Wow, that's an interesting observation I didn't think about. Yeah.
Yeah, and you and Jim both make a very provocative statement about that thinking by itself doesn't form character.
Yep.
And that's like provocative in the church environment because it's like, no, you're believing lies. You need to retrain the lies with truth, and that is true. But yep. You're saying it's never gonna. You kind of make the point that if the other side isn't developed and healthy, if you're not relationally healthy, that's why that sometimes occurs, right? Like you can't develop it. So just talk about that a little bit, like that the character has to develop through that side. Like, why are you guys so convinced that it has to happen through that side, the right side, the relational side?
Every way that we sense our environment. Everything that God has given us as sensors, even right now, we can see each other's faces kind of not great through the Skype connection. I can see some blue sky and snow outside. I can hear my wife doing something in the other room. Any kind of smells, like if you have coffee or tea, I can smell and taste my tea. Any other way we can sense it. It comes into goes through the sensors and enters into the back right side of our brain and travels from the back to the front on the right side, crosses over in the right to the back. And my right side is like 12 times a second processing it, whereas my left side, it gets it later and it processes it slower. And so believing the right things is very important, but not for the reasons we often tell people. It doesn't change our character, which is almost like our instantaneous responses to things, right? But knowing the right way, knowing the correct scriptures and how life works according to what we read in scripture is good in helping us clean up our messes, which is very important. We need to clean up our messes. But should we really just be going around life cleaning up our messes really well all the time? Is there another step where, hey, maybe we actually change the initial responses the way, and these, again, that's we get to character. This is the right brain response is what comes out before we even know it's coming out. If I subtly insult you, I can see something in your eyes and on your face in a 12th of a second. I know, oh man, I said something here. You didn't say anything. A lot of times it takes me a while before I realize I did it. So this is in character. When someone cuts you off in traffic, is it possible to change your spontaneous reaction to that from, one is dropping the F-bomb and yelling at the guy, or, fantasizing about his demise, versus,
yeah,
actually having a connection with Jesus and seeing the person with some compassion and realizing, I've done that too. And have this kind of slow, compassionate, humble, the same words, go back to Colossians 3:12, is my first response, things that line up with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, patience. The word patience is really relational patience. The older word we use is long suffering. That's probably a better word almost. It takes a lot of stuff, junk thrown at me before I lose myself, lose my temper, right? Are we developing long suffering where some people can do these things they do, and we quiet it, we connect with Jesus, and we start to see the person that we feel like strangling through Jesus's eyes, and he very quickly changes our perspective.
Your premise here is that you've identified 4 key ingredients that you think are essential for cultivating good spiritual soil, and that will produce, the healthy ingredients for, healthy church environment. So the 4 of those are relational joy, hesed, which is a Hebrew word that connected with attachment that I think you'll walk through. 3rd is group identity. And 4th is a healthy correction. And I think you see those somewhat sequential, right? So maybe can you start diving into the relational joy? And I will say on this one, this one is one of those ones that I think makes people who have been in a traditional church environment very uncomfortable. And you even write that in the book, right? But yeah. You want me to cultivate joy. This feels so squishy, and you have it as your foundational thing. So help stretch our thinking on how we need to think about this in a good way.
Can I ask a clarifying question first? Are
Yep.
Are those 4 aspects of the healthy soil? Do you see those cultivating essentially the right brain, or do you see those as necessary to develop both right and left?
Yeah, good question. No, those are full brain. We need both of the brains. We focus on the right brain because that's what's missing.
Yeah.
We actually, in Christianity, we've done a pretty good job in the church over the last 100 years helping people with the left brain stuff largely, although there's some holes there too. And so we focus on the right brain because that's what we haven't been doing. And it's important to say too, the soil is not personal. The soil is a community. We're working at this into the soil of our community. Mm. I can't go off in a desert, in a cave, and sit, with my legs crossed and my hands in some position and then try to build these soil on my own. Every single one of these requires a community, requires relational interaction. Okay. Mm-hmm. So think more of your church, your small group, your family. This is the soil. And then how do we increase these? How do we start putting these more nutrients in the soil so it grows more, vivaciously and greenly, more fruit is born. And so we start with joy. We probably should start with the definition. The neurological definition of joy is what I sense when I can tell from, Dr. Alan Shore even says the sparkle in your eye, but I can tell from your eyes, your face, your nonverbal tone of your voice, all these nonverbal things. I can tell very, very quickly. I can tell that you are happy to be with me and I feel special. And I feel you delighting in me. I feel that you care. We're connected. Early on when we're born, it's through smell. And then as our eyes come online and start working, mom and baby go through these cycles of joy and quiet together where their faces light up on each other and they build joy and they smile. And then the baby breaks eye contact and rests a while. And the mother lets the baby rest. And then the baby's back and they go up Joy Mountain together and build joy. And it's all nonverbal, right? Babies can't talk. So you don't need words for joy. You can have words if you want, but you don't need them because this is right brain. It's primarily right brain. And so joyful communities, if you just walk into a church that has joy, you can see people's faces are lighting up on each other. They're engaging each other. They lean in. Joy involves smiles many times, but also joy can be very serious and somber, right? Joy is not happiness. So you can be, if some people are going through a crisis in their church and people gather around and look them somberly in the eye and said, we're with you on this. Oh man, this is hard. I cannot believe this happened, but we're with you. I don't know what to say, but we're with you. That's very high joy. Although there's not smiles in that case, right? So joy can actually be intermingled with all of the emotions we can feel, both positive and negative.
How do you work that out? And like, what do you do if you walk into a church and everyone's kind of like, looks sort of grouchy, right? I mean, like, how do you go, we need to be more joyous, like as you're yelling it, right? I mean, how do you, I mean, you have some exercises on this, but I think that's kind of the part where it's like, people start to get nervous of like, what is this? Don't we just need to read scripture and train our brains, and then that will, realizing the value of Christ, that brings us joy. Like, we don't need this feels like psychobabble type stuff, right? Like, and I'm not saying that. I'm saying this is what the naysayer would be saying. So like, and I'm sure you've heard that before. So like, how do you work on this in a way that some traditionalist would go, okay, I can get on board with that. I guess seeing results is part of it, right?
Well, I actually agree with the statement, except for the word just. Right? We do need to get into the word, and we need to study, and it's a absolutely essential part of our discipleship to Jesus. I just don't say we just need the word and that's it. We need the word, and there's a lot more we need as well. And, from the Bible, I actually went through and did a reread of the whole Old and New Testament, looking for joy, looking for the word joy, looking for concepts of joy. One of the classic ones is, God, one of the few times God gives a prayer of blessing to Moses and Aaron, right? Mm-hmm. And because God doesn't usually give us prayers to pray over to bless the people with, but it's interesting, the specific prayer that God gives Aaron is, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May his face shine on you. Your face shining that's like, I read that, I remember thinking that is the neurological definition of joy that almost completely lines up with what Dr. Alan Shore discovered through brain scans and years of research, that the human brain is founded on joy, on interactions of joy with the faces, as looking for faces who are glad to be with me.
As I was researching a little bit, the word interpreted as the gospel is evangelion. And it signifies good, merry, glad, and joyful news that makes a man's heart glad and makes him sing, dance, and leap for joy. And that was from William Tyndale in the 1500s. I mean, yep. and that's like a beautiful thing. I think we truly have forgotten joy.
Yeah, and we build joy with each other, and we also build joy with God. So being able to receive the shining face of God on us, to actually sense that worth and this warmth of his light, the light of his face shining on us, that he wants us to feel and know that he is really happy to be with us. And that's what God said. Okay, if there's anything the Israelites need to know for a blessing from their priests, it's that I am glad to be with them. Here's the prayer I want you to pray. And so, but nobody knew the brain science back then except for God himself, who designed it. But now we're looking back and going, wow, it's profound. I was shocked by it. Yep.
And we start from this premise of sin so often that we forget that God really loves us. Like, he created us and said we were very good. Now, obviously sin has, taken a hold here on earth, and we're all born sinful, but like as a man created in God's image, we're loved, So that idea of, his face shining upon us is really beautiful.
How do we find both joy from God and kind of joy in one another? And also, like, we don't give joy to God, but we can give joy to others. So like, how does that like practically work out that you can like start to cultivate that soil, if you will? Like, how do I get out there and kind of work it, right, to make sure it's healthy?
Great question. We've come up with some good gratitude exercises of, thinking of a memory that you're grateful for, and that you sense there was kind of this connection with God too, like God was smiling too when that happened. Maybe you met a close friend or a spouse, or maybe your child was born, or maybe you just had a really good day of skiing, like one of those days where your heart is just full, or anything else. It could be, beauty in nature, relational things, and have people actually come up and kind of give the gratitude memory a title, and then go back and sit in it for a few minutes. And don't think about the memory, actually relive it. And even think of, how do I experience Jesus in this memory? Like the last time I went skiing for my 60th birthday, my friends took me skiing. I mentioned before the podcast started, there were 6 of us skiing. And last run of the day, 3 of us were out in front. It was I and my son, and then Dave, who's like one of my closest friends over the last 40 years. And the 3 of us were out in front. We're a little bit faster in front of everybody else. And we're just skiing, and we're just like weaving in out from each other, like a braiding hair almost. Like we're just going like this. And we're just completely relaxed and just kind of going and following little nooks and jipping in and out and around. And about halfway down that run, I thought, I don't want this run to end. Because I'm here with my son, who's 25, and one of my closest friends for 40 years, and we're just skiing in and out and just having a blast together. And then I sat in it for a while, and then sensed Jesus, that he was enjoying it as much as we were. As a matter of fact, Jesus was having a blast with us. And so in that, as I sit in that, I'm actually feeling the pleasure of Jesus. Like he is so glad we're together, and he's actually the one that moved it for us to be here for this moment, but he's also enjoying it with us. He's kind of skiing with us, if you will, and enjoying the whole thing, the whole experience. And so we actually have people start to build a memories list, give them titles, give each memory a title, build your list and start spending, 3 to 5 minutes in the morning and 3 to 5 minutes at night in a nonverbal gratitude, enjoying good gifts that God has given you. And they can be big things like when you meet your spouse, your best friend, or something like that. And they can be quite small, like a run at a ski resort, or a really good sunset, or a good cup of coffee in the morning. And you're just getting used to enjoying God's pleasure through the little things he sprinkles through our life. And some of them are big, a lot of them are little, but they're just little smiles of God saying, I love to give you good gifts. That's a very joyful interaction. And I do believe God can receive joy from us. Because I am glad to be with God. I'm glad to be with Jesus. I'm glad the Holy Spirit's living in me. And I'm glad I have a heavenly Father who is so much wiser than the Father I had on this earth. And that all 3 of them work together in tandem, and it's just fun to be with them. And so if I'm actually enjoying being with God, the Father, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit, they receive joy. Because they're the ones who designed the concept.
Well, first of all, I think we forgot to mention that on this virtual road trip, we're in Colorado, which your skiing is a lot more joyful than it is in Tennessee, by the way. We should point that out. But, I have to be honest, what you're saying, I think we're afraid to think that way, to feel that way. I think it makes us uncomfortable. There's something off in me, and I'm kind of afraid to admit it. Because I know what you're talking about, but it's almost like I've had similar moments like that. Even like we talked about soccer for a little bit, playing soccer, and moments of flow, right? You felt flow where things were like in slow motion, and it's not only cool, but it's joyous. And I have, as I became a Christian, kind of connect it back to God. If I say thanks to him, it makes it even richer. But I think we're afraid. And I don't know. That's my reflection as I'm listening to you.
Yeah. I appreciate your honesty in saying that. And the interesting thing about this gratitude practice is it brings stuff up. The reason it brings stuff up is you're actually, over time, as you start to practice this gratitude, your brain is getting stronger and stronger. And I honestly think, it's sometimes somewhat designed into the flesh of our brain. And I think the Holy Spirit plays a role in this as well. Is they're essentially saying, hey, you're getting stronger. Let's deal with this one misconception you have about me, that I don't really love you, or that I'm judging you right now, or that I'm always thinking you're just not enough. You've been saying that to yourself since you knew me. I think maybe today's a good day for us to change the very ground level ways we think together. And so gratitude not only fills up our joy tank, so to speak, it also starts to bring some stuff up that, percolates up and is ready for healing. And it heals in the presence of Jesus.
The neat tie-in to Jesus for me was thinking about right brain and left brain being disconnected. What connects them? And one of the things in my field as an eye doctor is the optic chiasm. And chiasm has the same root as cross, which ties those two things together. So The other thing I would say that is encouraging to me is that you address hesed, which I've heard in a few sermons, but this strong attachment that just when taught about really just seems so beautiful. So expound a little bit on that one.
Yeah, hesed is kind of like the firewall into our character. In other words, our character is largely changed by the people we're related and bonded to. It's not changed, like if I have a big anger problem, it's not going to be changed by me trying really, really hard not to lose my temper the next time, right? That's a losing strategy because, again, it's in the right brain. The anger is going to come out. My left brain has to clean it up. Mm-hmm. What's going to actually change my instantaneous response from anger into something more like compassion and kindness and what Jesus' brother wisely says, being slow to speak, quick to listen, right? Those are very right brain characteristics. That's, if we're working on if our right brain is working better and better, we become much, much slower to speak. And when we speak, we have a lot more space, a lot more empty space in our speech. That's what a functioning right brain does. When our right brain doesn't do well, then our left brain comes over and we talk really fast. We don't give any people 10 chances. And like 20 minutes later, I've not stopped talking and you're just like exhausted. And that's a left brain that's kind of taken over, and the right brain's not letting us slow ourselves down, speak leisurely, giving time for us to absorb things. And so the people we do this with, the people we build joy with, the people we eat meals with, the people we share our deepest weakness as well as successes with, we start to bond at a family level. Like our brain actually starts considering them family members. Jim Wilder uses the analogy of the VIP parking space. At the front of the company, there's like 10 spaces that are VIPs, get to park there all the time with their names on it. Mm-hmm. And the rest of us, know nothings, have to go fight each other for a parking space a mile away or whatever. But our brain has these like VIP parking spaces that when we start building hesed with one another and our brain starts considering each other family, that person gets almost like a VIP parking spot in my brain. And once a person gets that, then they have the actual opportunity to change my character, and I have the opportunity to change their character. But if we stay at the pre-hesed level where we see each other on Sunday, maybe after church we talk about the Bronco game or whatever game there is or whatever, but we never actually go deep in life together, we have very little interchange of maturity and character, and there's not a whole lot. Maybe we don't know our pastor. If it's a mega church, we don't even know who the pastor is. We like his teaching. He feels like a friend, but my brain doesn't think of that person as a friend because we haven't eaten meals together. We haven't, taken each other to the airport. We haven't, shared the deepest pains and sorrows of our lives together. And so even though he may be a really, really good speaker in front of thousands of people, he's not changing my brain much.
I think you've convicted me on how fast I speak, and I'm like, I need to slow down. but do we need to be more intentional about trying to make deeper connections? There's only so many people I can really, really go deep with, and there's like different gradations of friendship to acquaintance, right? How do you work within kind of the practical time bounds of that? And is there a way to maybe even kind of have sort of hesed attachments without even spending a huge amount of time together? I don't know. I'm kind of throwing it out there for some practical advice.
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's what we're hoping to learn. Like, I'm consulting a lot of churches, and what I tell churches, I say, how to actually implement this in a church is a lot more difficult than what I'm doing to you, which I'm training a bunch of really hungry church leaders. Because they don't come to me unless they're hungry, right? The people that don't care about this don't call me. And so I even tell them, I'm training you in these relational skills and maturity and character development, but you have to turn around and you have to train people, some of whom will be excited and some of them will be like, what in the world are we doing this for in church? Just give me a sermon, a couple songs, I'm good, right? How this actually gets developed in church, I even tell churches this, eventually if I train you enough, you're going to go around and back and you're going to start spreading this and you're going to learn lots of stuff I don't know. And so I'm kind of like at this middle of the axle of all these spokes and hoping to pass the good stuff around to everybody. But I think this is going to be solved not by one genius person, expert, but by a learning community of church leaders, missionaries, people that are doing this and coming back and saying, this didn't work at all, but when I tweaked it a little bit, it really worked well.
So one of the big premises of our show is that to get out of the tensions, the only way you can do it is to surrender to Christ. And the whole thing there is we believe the fundamental control or tension is between control and surrender. So when we're controlling,
Yep.
we're trying to do everything in our strength, which leads us to one side of the brain, which leads us to, pick any tension, faith versus works, it leads us to go down one-dimensional pathways. And so like
Yep.
what I'm getting at is by surrendering to Christ, I think he also works in that context, right? What culture is it? How do they interact with one another? What's the history here, right? Like he knows the information that we can't strategize around. But I think your point of focusing on these attachments and not just kind of leaving after the sermon, I think that's a little bit of a litmus test of you hear the sermon and everyone just kind of bolts out of the door.
Right.
Maybe something's wrong there, right?
Yeah, a healthy church, you should have to kick the people out and tell them like, hey, we're turning the lights off here. Don't you people have homes?
Rob and I try to be those
And if
people.
you have to say that,
We're the last people out. Sometimes our wives get
that's a
mad.
good sign. That's a very good sign. But there are other left brain things we can do where we can actually have strategies that work. And that is, are we regularly talking about how we want this to be like family, even if we don't know exactly how to do it? Are we having strategies so that we're eating together regularly? Right? That's a left brain strategy that builds a right brain skill, right? That's full brain. Do we regularly share weaknesses in church? Does the pastor regularly share a failing he had in the previous week? Or do we only share the successes? We only talk about the good stuff. We hide the bad stuff. If that's the case, you're not going to have much hesed growing there because you're kind of putting up your smiley, your fake plastic Christian smile. And when we have that on, it doesn't, nothing really works well. And so there are some specific strategies of things we can do, that over time will deepen the level of hesed we have with each other.
Yeah, you mentioned food plays a role in that.
Yep.
You just mentioned it, meals, food, but could you just paint a very brief picture of something like that?
Well, first of all, the general rule is what having some setup or structure in your church that gets people to be eating together regularly. Maybe it's the small groups and encourage them once a month to make it a meal.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's too much to do that every small group, or maybe it's not. We had a small group for 5 years where we cooked people dinner every single week. And we bonded deeply in that group.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also some exercises, like in our church, we did an exercise where so this was a small group, like 10, 12 people. Everyone brought a significant food that they like and is particular to how God made them, but just a little, and brought just enough for a little bite for each person. So like for me, example, I have a big garden. If you've read my book, I grow tomatoes. And so I had a bunch of cherry tomatoes. So I brought a cherry tomato for every person. Another person brought a really good dark chocolate. And someone brought a typical type of cracker they really like. Another person brought bread. They cooked, all sorts of different things. And we just stood up in a circle, and I let's say I go first, and I give each person face to face a tomato, and we enjoy it. I give it to them, and they eat it and enjoy it, and then I give it to the next person, and go around the circle, and then the next person does it. And the next person, kind of weird,
but fun. Yeah,
it wasn't weird in this case because it wasn't strangers. That'd be weird to do with strangers, but if you're doing it with people it's actually not that weird.
Welcome to our life group. I will be feeding you food.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, you definitely have to know them.
But when you cook dinner for someone, that's essentially what you're doing. You are cooking food, and you're putting it on the table, and their brains start looking to you like, whoa, this person's actually, at some level, they're taking care of me, and they're doing something that actually gives me life. It's way more profound than we think about it, just sitting down and having a meal. Actually, if you cooked a barbecue for me and invited me over and I'm sitting down, you just gave me some life. You gave me some things that are into my bloodstream and is strengthening my cells and giving me nutrients and minerals and doing all sorts of really good stuff. And my body remembers that.
Let's move to the third nutrient for the soil, which is group identity. And I think what stuck out to me about this is it's kind of scary that we all form some group identity, whether we like it or not, right? So you think about the classic case of the Nazis, right? And there was certainly a group identity there, but we're all kind of...
Very strong one.
Yes, in a bad direction. But so we're all influenced and become part of a culture in a local church. So talk about that. Like why is it important, and how do you make sure it's kind of not, that it is moving in a good direction?
Our group identity should all align with what God's family looks like. In other words, our group identity brings a little bit of heaven to earth if when we live like our truest selves. For example, you ask the question, well, what can we do to build Hesed? Well, another thing you can do is have some really good group identity about that topic. Like, we are people who slow down with each other and don't just share the shallow things, but, go where God wants us to go with another person. Or we're a people who find time to have meals with each other, even though we might have a busy schedule. Those are good group identities. We look at Jesus, that lines up with Jesus' life. I mean, he's eaten with people. A lot of his most important teachings were around food. He always seemed to have time for people, interrupting them. And it's good to have just some good baseline group identity. I think the fundamental baseline identity for Christian discipleship is that we are a people who love our enemies, and we return blessings for cursings. Like you mentioned, love is the central characteristic of Christian discipleship. It's the one litmus thing we look to see if our discipleship's actually working, or is it just a bunch of words. Is if we look at people and see a little bit, are they a little bit more this year than last year able to love people even in the difficult situations when there's pressure? A lot of times loving the most difficult people, loving people that feel like enemies, they don't even need to necessarily be enemies, but in a certain times when people say certain things, they sure feel like an enemy to me all of a sudden. And oftentimes that's where our character breaks down, and the stuff that comes out doesn't look at all like God's family. Now, most of us feel guilty, like, oh man, what a lousy Christian I am. Why did this person say this thing? They provoked this. It's their fault. Why'd they make me angry? We'll do all sorts of things like that. But a better response to that is like, wow, I really blew it there. Jesus, what might you show me through this? This is maybe a good failure. Maybe I needed to fail here. And listen to Jesus about your people. And that really takes us to the fourth soil, which is healthy correction. Healthy correction is really, how do we handle when one of us stops acting like ourselves? And we all do this. And especially if we're living in a tight connection and we're sharing weaknesses and we're going deep together, we're also going to start stepping on each other's toes. And this is usually what blows up home groups in churches. They go really well for 18 months. Then they get to start building Hesed. Then they start stepping each other's toes, and then it blows up.
And let me make a connection here too of I think between a group identity and healthy correction, the statement, and then this was helpful to me, of we are these types of people. This is who we are. This is our identity. Yeah. That, what's interesting about that is I was reading through your book, and something happened with my daughter, and it was a correcting moment. So I was applying both of these. I don't even know if I got to the correction part yet, but I was reading the we are. And I tried the approach. You give this vignette about a coach who gets in the face of a player and is really ugly, and then an alternative of how to correct them. And so I said to her, that's not who we are. That's not what we do. I use that language specifically as I was reading your book real time. So I think those are connected pieces, right? That our identity doesn't just sit there and say, we are, but I'm not going to correct. You're talking about them behind their back, that they're not being the we are that we want them to be, which is really super unhealthy, right? So is that, am I thinking about that right? And would you add anything to it?
Healthy correction actually feels better. It's still, there's a level of pain to healthy correction as well, but it feels deeply relational and loving, versus toxic correction just is basically saying you're bad. Say you have a toddler and he throws his green, he's on his high chair with his little thing, and he doesn't like green beans, and he grabs his green beans and throws them on the floor. Toxic correction will be, don't do that. That's a bad boy. Don't you ever do that again. It's toxic because I'm basically telling him you're a bad little boy, and by the way, you're on your own in the badness. I ain't helping you with it at all, right? I give him no help. I just make him feel bad. Healthy correction, and we see Jesus doing this. If you read through Jesus' life again, you see him do this over and over again. Healthy correction is, hey, wait a second here. These green beans, actually, we worked hard to buy these and cook these, your mom and I, and we consider food as very, very precious. So we don't throw green beans on the floor. We're always grateful, even if it may not be our favorite food. We're always grateful for the food that God has given us. We don't throw them on the floor. But doesn't that feel very different?
Absolutely.
Even if we didn't know brain science, if you said it to me, I'm like, I agree. I don't even know why I agree, but that just feels better. Like that's going to train me. Whereas the other one just overwhelms me, but it doesn't train my brain. It doesn't change my future behavior. But healthy correction actually will change my future spontaneous response. That's the way you change your anger problem, is you have some people correct you, and you have some good group identity around anger. And you share stories when you lost it and let people correct you. They don't even have to be there in the moment. You can go to a friend. I've gone to my wife before and said something would happened, and maybe it was on my own. I can't remember. Come back and said, Claudia, I think you could give me some healthy correction. Here's what I did, blah, blah, blah. And I'll tell her, now give it to me. And she'll think it up, and then she'll give me some healthy correction. So I'm actually asking for it because I want a better brain.
A lot of times anger is sort of pushed down or squished down. It's not processed. With friends, it's sort of behind closed doors in our family, or behind the windshield of our car,
And we've actually joked around, but I don't think we've ever done it, that in the guys group, like, hey, this Thursday, is going to be my day where you correct me. I'm going to prepare myself for it. I'm going to, strap myself down. Yep. We haven't actually done it. But I think you're saying one of the key ways to making this work is that you start to get healthy enough and comfortable enough that you start inviting it from those that you trust, right? You don't want to ask a toxic source to correct you, because they will. But is that a good way to encourage it? Or are there other ways to do that?
The best situations is when they've seen you do something that, just thought, that's not the Neil I know. Huh. Yeah, maybe we'll have a chance to do some training on him, and I hope he has a chance to do the same on me. And that's when they go to you and say, what you did this yesterday or whatever it was. It's very specific. And healthy correction is very much a reminder of our group. It's a group identity reminder. You forgot who we are and how we handle this situation. And it's done with humility. Like I might even say, I've done that myself. So I'm not speaking above you. I've done the same thing. So let's learn together. But, the way you treated that one woman who asked you that question, it seemed like you were kind of impatient with her. And so what might be a good group identity for patience? Well, that might be we're a people that are very patient with others because God is so much more patient with us. And so how can we be less patient with someone else than God is with us? You have to practice it. We practiced it in our basement for 14 straight weeks in a training with Jim Wilder. We came up with group identity. We did hypothetical corrections on each other every single week for different situations for 14 weeks. Hypotheticals are good for training because you don't have all the energy and guilt and everything. It's like, it's not true. And so you're just practicing. So it's a really easy way to get used to forming the words and putting it together. And, training in itself is one of the missing things in our churches. We don't train people. We just instruct them and give them information, but we don't really train them very much. And especially this is important. This kind of training is really leaning up to us being a people who love well, because that's how those skills get developed.
If we're not developing, the ingredients of the soil that we've just talked about, that leaves room for narcissism to grow. Can you kind of expound on that a little bit? Because I think you use a bit of a different definition, or a different definition than I'm used to of narcissism.
Jim started talking about narcissism in this training we did.
Yeah.
And I asked him once, I said, well, because I kind of knew a vague definition of narcissists, all the stuff you hear, they don't have empathy, and
right.
They have to be special. They have to be the biggest personality in the room. And so I was expecting all that kind of stuff. And Jim said, a narcissist is a person who cannot metabolize shame in a relational way. And I waited a second. And I said, can you expound on that? I'm not sure I know what that means.
So you didn't get it immediately either.
No, I understand it now.
Okay. My gut reaction to that, though, and maybe it is that we're all narcissistic, right? I mean, we all can't metabolize shame or that well, right?
A narcissist is also a person who will never accept healthy correction. As a result of and they actually set their lives up in a way that create a bubble around them of people that are kind of fear bonded and trying to protect him from any kind of invasion into anything like this. If you're insulating yourself against healthy correction, that means your character is stuck. It's not growing. Because that's literally the way our character grows, is by you saying, hey, Michael, that was not your best self back there. I know who Michel Hendricks is, and you weren't. And a lot of times that's all you need to say. You tell that to me, if I've been in this work, I go, oh, you're right. And you've already just corrected me just by saying that, right? Whereas a narcissist is like, don't you dare say anything wrong about me at any time at all. And if you do, you're fired. And so anybody who has any kind of courage or backbone will immediately be ejected from the ship. And then they'll hire brand new, newbie people that are all kind of goggly eyed that this pastor hired me and blah, 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 until 2 years later they get fired.
Narcissism, that term, and church hurt, and I think you can go on a witch hunt, right? There's narcissistic leaders, but you can also go on a witch hunt to say everyone's a narcissist, right? So talk a little bit about that. Like, why the connection to narcissism, and do people, how do you know to not, when it's truly there, or when you maybe need to reflect a little bit on yourself about what's really going on?
If you have a community that's kind of building joy and has some good hesed, that will attract a narcissist. Because of the soil components, joy and hesed work a lot like fertilizer, so it makes everything grow. And if you've done any kind of gardening, not everything that's coming up in my garden I want to be there.
Most of it's not what I want.
Right.
No, it's really not.
Whereas the group identity, the second two nutrients of soil, healthy relational soil, they make sure we're growing what we want to grow. We're growing the right stuff, right? And so you can start to do this, and you'll just be attracting narcissists if you're not building group identity and practicing healthy correction. But you're also absolutely right about the witch hunt, which is why, like in the training we did and the training we do at churches, that starts with each one person in their group looking at their own narcissism and working on it. We all work on it together. So there's no like, we're these great people and then you're this bad narcissist. It's like we're all different scales on narcissism. Have different levels of narcissistic characteristics. But we're all working on it together because we need to work this out of us and we need to work it out of our soil, of our community.
Well, and that's to me sounds like removing the plank from your own eye before the speck in your brother's eye, right? I mean, so it's very biblically based principle. Okay.
So the 14 weeks we worked were primarily focused on us and, where does this stuff pop up in our lives? Not so much who are these narcissists we need to go correct. We're not even really focused on how do you handle a narcissist when they get in a church. We get emails all the time, and that's a really, really hard task. But the better task to focus on is back it up before that and say, what can we do to churches right now so that narcissism just doesn't even get a chance to gain a foothold? And if you're building really good group identity, you're bonding and joy, but you're building a really good foundation of group identity of what kind of people we are in general life, not just everyday life. And then we're regularly practicing and sharing examples of when I'm corrected or when I corrected my son or when my wife corrected me, or when even that the narcissistic brain will see that and they'll say, wait, them being corrected didn't kill him. As a matter of fact, that person says that he or she actually became a better person after being corrected. And you've just given the narcissistic brain a picture of something they may have never seen before. Because the correct reaction and response to a narcissist, actually the first level response should be compassion, because there's a reason why they will not accept any correction. And it probably goes way back into their childhood. And the appropriate response for that is, oh man, I'm sorry. That is really hard. I can see why all correction would seem bad to you. It probably would to me too if I had to live that.
What would you want to say to the listener about this topic that you think, I don't know, that you want them to hear or leave with, or you think is misunderstood? How would you like to conclude?
Love is the central characteristic of being a Christian. It's the central characteristic of the Christian family, the family of God that he wants us to bring successively and in a growing way on earth right now, and will become in its fullest in the future. And if our churches are not only places that we love each other really well, but we have so much love and have developed it so much that we can actually love the most difficult people, not only in our churches, but most difficult people in our society, in our culture. So that when there's a problem person, instead of running away, we run to that person because we have some relational skills we've developed intentionally in our churches to know how to love a really, really hard person. The other half of church, every skill that's a right brain skill, kind of a new thing that we want to add to the other subset of skills, every one of those is points at some degree or another at helping us love better. And, when I work with churches, we work for like a year. We'll meet twice a month for 90 minutes for a whole year, like a lead team or a team of group leaders or whatever, like say 8 people or 10 people, 12 people. And it's very much like when you learn a sport or you learn a musical instrument. You start with something really easy until you get that, then you get something a little harder, and then something a little harder like soccer, skiing, everything. We do this. And we do this with love. We teach the foundational skills of love. We let you rep on them, get lots of repetitions on them. Then we build on the next level up of learning how to quiet big emotions, and then learn next level up, learning when your relational circuits in your brain have switched off and you stop loving well. Learn how to recognize. So we actually break it down very much because it's a very, very difficult task, but we've never really trained around this in the church. It's a really difficult task, but it's almost like me, if I had a 10-year-old daughter and I went up to her and said, "Hey, Anna, here's my tool chest. I want you to go out into the garage and rebuild my carburetor of my Jeep, and don't come back in until you're done." And I, lock her out in the garage. That's kind of what we do in our churches around love and loving our enemies. We tell people to do it, but we don't tell them how. We don't train them. We're not with them. We're not slowly working that muscle so it gets a little bit stronger each year. We're just kind of telling people every so often when it comes up in the scriptures we're preaching.
And is this some of the work you and Jim do in the life model works? Is
Yep.
it pretty much so you guys do, this book is kind of talking about one element of sort of training your brain in the church context, but I think you guys probably help more broadly too. Or is it all about for church folks? Or just talk a little bit about the life model works before we close.
Yeah, the consulting I do, it's with a lot of churches, a lot of mission groups, but I also do it with some other groups, even non-Christian groups. I've done it with some, and but it's very much a training, but it's really mastering skills, relational and emotional skills that allow you to operate at a very high emotional and relational capacity, and help you, actually pass your skills on to the people around you. It's what we call a multi-generational community, where the elder, more mature people are passing these relational skills on to the younger people who didn't get them from their parents. And that we are reminding each other with good stories and examples and pictures of what a really good love looks like. So we tell our love stories, and not a lot. We also tell our failure stories where we failed to love well, but we don't end there. We say what it would have looked like if I'd been able to love well, like love the way God's family loves. This is what I would have done instead. And so, who doesn't want a church that is producing people who love better than they do right now? It's almost like we're looking for a new reformation, but instead of a doctrinal reformation, it's a relational reformation. And so really, we can't do any of this without Jesus. We can't do this without him passing to us his thoughts through the Holy Spirit so that we can get a wisdom that's far above us. And that's actually one of the skills we teach, is how do you stay in an active connection with Jesus even when the you-know-what just hit the fan in our church? Because that's usually when we lose it. Like in the big stuff, all of a sudden, I don't know where Jesus is. Feels like I'm the only one in the room now. Well, that's a muscle that can be trained. We can actually grow our connection to Jesus' strengths, so that we're aware more of his thoughts, his perspectives, his active presence, even when there's big emotions. Because that's usually when at least for me, that's when I lose my sense of Jesus' presence.
This has been very encouraging, Michael. First of all, this is all based on Scripture and brain research. It's bringing both together. So listener, if you feel a little bit uneasy about stuff, maybe you need to feel a little bit uneasy. Pick up the book, take a look at it. We're just scratching the surface here. I found it very helpful and informative. It actually, I think if you're on a journey, you should be expanding your thinking. You should be growing. It doesn't mean you have to accept it all. I think that this falls in that camp of things that make me slightly uncomfortable, but I should look into them. That's how I kind of frame it. So thanks again for your time. Really appreciated it. And thank you, listener, for joining us for another episode of A World in Tension.